Hello and welcome to The Energy Gang, a discussion show about the fast-moving world of energy. I'm Ed Crooks, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you all to a special live recording of The Energy Gang for Climate Week here at the Kimmel Center at New York University. What we're going to be talking about today is a new world for electricity in the US. We've had about 2 decades where power demand has roughly flatlined in this country, basically no growth at all. But now it looks like that is changing very fundamentally, and we're entering a new world where power demand is going to be growing very significantly over the coming years and decades. And that has all kinds of implications for consumers, for the industry, for the pace of decarbonization in the electricity sector, of course, very important priority for many of us. And that's what we're going to be talking about today and exploring some of the implications of what's going on. So to do that, we have some great guests here joining us on the show. Maybe start with you, Caroline Golin. Caroline Golin, who is the Global Head of Energy Market Development and Innovation at Google. Caroline, thanks a lot for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Welcome to the Energy Gang. We also have Kate Gordon, who's the Chief Executive of California Forward, which is do you call yourselves a think tank? What's the right way to think about what you do?
Think and do tank.
A think and do tank, indeed. Much better than just thinking. And you work on sustainable development in California, right? Yeah. And also, until quite recently, you were in the administration, you were an advisor to the Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm.
I was, and I'm actually still on her advisory board.
Right, okay, thank you. Thanks very much for joining us. We also have our old friend Amy Myers-Jaffe, our host here, from NYU's Climate and Sustainability Lab. Thanks very much for coming along again. And thanks.
Great to be here on Climate Week, Ed.
Yeah, and thanks particularly for hosting us in this fantastic location, this really wonderful venue we're in right now. And last, but by no means least, Zhou, who is my colleague, in fact, at Wood Mackenzie for the first time on the show, a colleague. He's our head of power and renewables. Xizhou, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you. Being a big fan for many years, it's my 3rd month in Wood Mac, and great to be here with you and be in the inside.
Very kind of you to say so, and so thanks very much for being here. So look, Caroline, I was wondering if I could start with you on this then. As I said, we're in this new world of electricity demand growth in the US. Obviously, a lot of the focus is on AI and data centers and the way that's driving this expected growth in demand for power. It's clearly not the only thing that's going on. We're also seeing reindustrialization, a lot of investment in new manufacturing facilities in the US, new chip plants, new solar module plants, new battery plants, and so on. There's also electrification of transport. So there's more to the story than just AI, but AI is clearly a very important part of it. And you at Google are right at the heart of that. So perhaps, could you set the scene for us a little bit? Tell us about what you're doing at Google and what you need in terms of the development of the electricity sector to support your plans.
Yeah, I mean, we are right in the center of it. It's exactly the right answer. So at Google, generally speaking, my job is to create the market structures or the partnerships or the new business models that's going to allow us to meet our energy goals, chiefly among them to power all of our data centers on 24/7 carbon-free energy. And you've had my friends on before that have talked about this initiative, and I think you've had Brian and Melissa on talking about just generally the heart of this. I think that what I see when I look across the sector right now is a bit of a disconnect on the business models that are going to get us to where we want to go. Yes, AI and yes, data centers are at the front of the wave, but we're just the tip of this. Behind us, we have electrification of the industrial sector, we have EV electrification, we have household electrification, and it's going to keep coming. And what better businesses to be at the tip of the wave than the ones that want to power their demand with clean energy. Unfortunately, the business models and the regulatory structures for us to be able to do that, they just weren't built in this way, right? And so a lot of what I'm looking at is saying, okay, how do we actually change the business models that have allowed us to invest in clean energy to date? And largely what we've done is we've looked at PPA structures, right? That's been the model. But I've said this before, I can't build a data center on RECs, right? So now the name of the game is how do you deliver clean capacity? And so a lot of what we're working on right now is how do you change the business structure, the investment structure to focus on delivered clean capacity? That's not been done because load growth was flat. We had overcapacity. Everyone was eating up capacity on the system, right? So we've launched a number of new initiatives. One business model we launched this year, the Clean Transition Tariff, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. But it sort of allows us to co-invest in clean capacity in a way with our utility that we've never been able to do before, right? And I think that it's these types of business models and this evolution and sort of the thinking that's really important. It's also really important, and I hope we do talk about this today, is to think at all different levels of the innovative supply chain. It's not just about big investments in generation anymore. It's also about investments in the grid. It's about investments in energy efficiency. It's about investments in flexibility and grid enhancing technologies. This is nothing Google's ever had to think about investing before. So where's the value stream for that? You know, how are we going to get credit for that investment? How are we going to speed to capacity on that? That's a really cool place to be in. It's also really scary because no one knows where it's going to go. But right now, I think where I'm really excited and where Google's really excited is to sort of be that innovative partner, to take that first step with the utilities and with our developers to say, yeah, we've never done this before, but we all know we need to, and we need to spur these innovations. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Load of fantastic points there, many of which I want to come back to in a moment. But before I do, I want to bring you in, Kate Golin. Interested in your perspective on sort of the opportunities and challenges of some of these trends we're seeing. As you say, so you're working on sustainable development in lots of ways. These innovations can be great for development, creating jobs, creating opportunity, and yet also creating strains and tensions for communities, for the environment, and so on. How do you think about balancing those, the positives and the negatives?
Right. It is a huge endeavor, and I just want to build on what Carolyn said. It's everything we're doing is built on systems that were not designed to do everything we're doing. So it's not just that the grid, was fundamentally built to provide supply to meet growing demand, and now we're trying to figure out how to have demand adjust to meet variable supply. That's a big change. The load growth is enormous, and I would add to your list of things contributing to it, extreme heat, right? I mean, just the growth of air conditioning is a huge contributor as well. We're seeing that all over California, and I know the U.S. The existing regulatory structure was built for environmental regulation. It was essentially built to stop harms from industry, right? So the idea is like, we're building a bunch of stuff. We need to make sure that it's not overly toxic and not overly harming communities. Everything we built out, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, NEPA, CEQA, whatever, was built to minimize those harms. And now we're saying we have to build a whole bunch of stuff in order to address climate change and meet all this demand. We've sort of grafted it all onto that system, and that's challenging. So, and then just the meeting the load growth, dealing with resilience, all of the things on the grid are still rate-based, and that's just driving costs up absolutely everywhere. And so I think it's a complicated set of things that in some ways we sort of have to question all of the underlying structures, the financial structures, the infrastructure investment structures. I mean, think about transportation, right? The whole system is paid for in large part by the gas tax, which is now going away because of electrification. And we haven't figured out how to think about electric vehicles as part of a transportation and a grid infrastructure system. So it's all just changing. And just on top of that, the last time we significantly invested in our infrastructure in this country was, our grandparents' time, probably. Robert Moses, right? And you think about that, looking out at this beautiful skyline, that was at a time when a lot of the projects were done despite what the community thought about them, or despite, worker conditions, or despite, availability of supply chains, whatever. And now we're in a world where we cannot do that. We shouldn't do that. We have to learn from that. But that also means that there's this whole additional layer of all the community benefits plans conversations, all of the, grappling with kind of permitting and siting, which can become a huge cost to these projects, or can be a place where you can actually engage productively with communities. So I think it's barrier and opportunity at the same time, which is what everybody will say all of Climate Week. I know we all say that all the time, but it really is I think a moment where we all need to take a step back and rethink absolutely everything. We cannot do this tinkering on the edges.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that's something to think about. Amy, what do you? I mean, everything we know is wrong.
I mean, I think ultimately, and Kate was saying this in the past, we also have sort of grafted on now. When you think about what happened in China, China set this industrial policy. They didn't have the infrastructure yet. And, we always talk about the leapfrog, we don't have to lay telephone wires because we're going to have cell phones. So they built this amazing infrastructure to be consistent with a planned industrial policy. Now, we're in the United States. We have this huge benefit, which is that we're probably one of the most we're probably one of the most innovative, countries in the world. Kudos to Silicon Valley and the tech companies because we have products and inventions, but even going back in energy, a lot of the things we're using, whether it's batteries or whether it's the original solar panels or the original wind technology, all of this stuff came, some of it from either Pentagon. I think people don't really remember that the Pentagon had a contest in the Mojave Desert for somebody to come up with an automated vehicle, and all the people who now are at Google or Uber or all these places were all in that contest, right? So we have this incredible innovation system in the United States. We turn around and say, oh, geez, we need to use it to, win in the world economy and accelerate the energy transition, and we're going to do industrial policy, and people are like, oh my God, we're doing industrial policy, and yet we're grafting now this huge industrial policy onto infrastructure that hasn't addressed that kind of a program in decades.
Xizhou, what do you think?
I think this is really a point of change for the U.S. economy in many ways. So, I think everybody's a bit kind of freaking out over this demand growth now, right? And then we watch global economy, and it was previously based in Asia. They've been dealing with demand growth for 2 decades, and they kind of knew how to do it, whether or not it's China, Southeast Asia, etc. Here in the U.S., because of the flat growth on the electricity sector the past 2 decades, we kind of forgot what it is like to have rapid demand growth. So when the demand is coming, everybody feel like they got hit by a bus. And now especially, we're saying that, in our forecast, probably by 2035, we're looking at 23 gigawatts of new large load growth from some of the sectors that Carolyn was talking about. But it's not just data centers. The manufacturing of solar panels, batteries, in our estimate, that can bring another 10 gigawatts of demand into the sector. So we're going through this reindustrialization process, or at least, the imagination is what we're going through, but the rest of the economy has to adjust to that kind of new reality.
And let me just throw in just a little factoid here, what we discussed, because Kate mentioned, heat, right? And if anybody goes to the NREL site, you'll see that when you think like, oh, I'm going to make a little map of all the places that have a giant amount of increase in degree days, and you're thinking it's just going to be a handful of states, and you look at the NREL map, and it's the entire map of the United States, right? So just to give you a data point, in September 2022, we had this giant heat wave in September in California. People remember it. Miraculously, it did not cause a brownout, but the statistics are that typically in Xizhou, right, in California, summer peak is something like 30 gigawatt, and in September 2022, it surged to 50 gigawatts, so up 60% in just 1 month from heat. And this is when, remember, people were told to put their thermostat down to 78 and don't plug in your car at the following time during peak. So, if you think about that statistic from California for 1 month, September, which isn't normally even a hot month, right? Well, now we're learning. And I'm telling you that if you go, I invite you to go to the NREL map and look for yourself, and you see all the different states that might be experiencing that going forward, you can understand the scale of the problem.
I was just going to say, and transmission is less effective when it's that hot as well. So you have a supply decline and a demand increase simultaneously, and people, I think, forget about that, as well as, again, just the we built this entire infrastructure on the assumption of a stable climate, and we no longer have a stable climate. So every single thing we're now building to meet this new demand, we have to build with the idea of the potential risk and the projections of what will happen from a climate perspective.
Okay, so I hear what all of you are saying, and I feel like I want to disagree with all of you in the sense that, I mean, I don't disagree with any of the facts you've just been presenting, and I don't disagree with any of the arguments about the scale of the challenge, but when I hear comments like, we need to change everything, we need to change the system fundamentally, the business model for the power sector in this country is fundamentally flawed and needs to change, regulatory structures aren't fit for purpose. All of those things are phenomenally difficult to change, right? This is a very, very complex system, not least as an outsider, I'm not sure if I should be commenting on the US political system, but the organization of federal and state and local policy and the way all of those interact, the ways you have so many different regulators can take an interest in what you're doing, the way that the power sector is fragmented into so many different companies and so on, makes it hard, very hard, I think, to get that kind of comprehensive change that you're saying is required to meet the kind of challenges that we're facing. I mean, I don't know, Caroline, am I being excessively pessimistic?
I mean, you can be pessimistic and right at the same time, I guess. No, I mean, it seems insurmountable, but, you know, what I always tell my team and what I tell people is that, you know, we exist in place and time, and so start in the place and time where you exist, right? So we may not change FERC, but maybe we change utility program offerings where we have data centers, right? And so I think what I see at the core of all this is that you have more capital than we actually need to do this transition. Everyone says there's no money out there. Oh, it's so expensive. No, there's capital out there. And trust me, I've been in so many roundtables this week telling everyone there's capital out there. It's a misalignment of how we place the capital and where the value streams are, right? And so, you know, we look at the buyer economy, right? So the big clean energy buyers. And we're deploying $70 billion to date in clean energy, just by, you know, these big corporate buyers globally. And none of that money was actually aligned at advancing the decarbonization goals of the utility by which we took service from. It was all on a separate balance sheet. It was all in a separate area. It was all about meeting our own sustainability goals. And we did some great things with those investments. We drove down the cost of wind and solar. We made it available and cheaper for many, many more participants. But we weren't actually integrated with what the purpose of the grid was, which was to serve all customers reliably. Now, in hindsight, we weren't that way because there wasn't an offering for us to do it that way. We just did what was easiest. What was easiest to go on the market and sign a PPA. It's the easiest thing you can do. So now we're sitting here and we're going, oh, we actually really need to worry about the grid. Okay, great. But guess what? We have this amazing muscle memory, and we have all these companies that are like, we have these energy divisions. We have the ability to think creatively. We're driven, the tech world is driven by the idea of break stuff and fix it better, okay? So I'm not a pessimist in the sense that it's insurmountable. I'm an optimist in the sense that you have the right companies at the forefront trying to break things and fix it better. The problem that I see is that we get really, really, really hung up on answering all of the questions at once, instead of really targeting the ones that we know we can move quickly. And transmission is something that's makes my head spin, but there are small ways that we can move transmission quickly. There are small investments we can make. Clean energy and reliability at, you know, the multi-gigawatt scale feels insurmountable, but when you take a look at individual systems and you say, well, what are the innovations in this, this, and this, and this we can deploy, that's the fundamental paradigm shift. And I think that the more that we can just focus in on what are the micro things we can do to make the macro seem easier, and we all focus on that together, I do think we will get there. I mean, we put a man on the moon, right? Like, we can do this.
I mean, I think that's right. I am a big believer in incremental change. Like, this whole thing is going to take incremental change. I just think we have to make sure that it's moving toward the systems change that we ultimately need, not opposing it. So I do think also that just from the policy world, which I've been in for 20 years, it isn't like no one was talking about the need for a clean energy industrial policy 20 years ago. People were talking about it. We were talking about
Yeah,
infrastructure
Manhattan
investment.
Project. Everybody
Right.
talked about the Manhattan
I
Project.
mean, I started the Apollo Alliance, right, on this very topic. I wrote a paper at Center for American Progress 15 years ago about how we needed to invest in infrastructure, workforce, and new technology to catch up with China. Like, we've been talking about this forever. What it takes, though, sometimes is events and the right people. And I actually do not think we would have gotten the combination of the infrastructure bill, CHIPS and Science, and IRA, which are the three big climate bills, had there not been COVID. Because COVID hits and everyone realizes that the supply chain is incredibly unresilient. And everyone realizes the level to which our knowledge economy has become dependent on China. And with the simmering geopolitical tensions with China leading into COVID, and then COVID just underscoring this for everybody, I think it fundamentally changed the conversation. You had an interesting coalition of people coming in with, frankly, anti-China, pro-labor, pro-climate, all these different factions coming together, making these bills possible. I don't know that we would have seen it before. Similarly, the Russia-Ukraine situation, huge impact on how we're thinking about energy and energy policy, and all of those happening at a time where there happened to be somebody who was in the White House who had been thinking about industrial policy, right? Sort of had a sense around kind of the need of manufacturing economies and industrial economies. So I think it's partly that, and it's like sort of partly we think about these things all the time, and we know the system has to change, but then there's these moments.
But you're saying a lot has changed, but a lot more still needs to change
100%.
further.
Yeah, I mean, just because the world is fundamentally changing. I mean, I think we talk so much, for so many years we've had emissions reduction as our only metric that we've used for, are we making progress? So we've signed all the declarations, we've made all the goals, we have all the agreements. We've acted as if that's a localized phenomenon, and like we can reduce it in the US and it's like a Sudoku chart and you can do this and it gets this. The reality is, at the same time we're doing that, it's not like local pollutants. I mean, carbon stays in our atmosphere for maybe 2 weeks and then it goes global, right? So it's fundamentally global. Yes, we're raising our own energy demand by moving manufacturing here. We're also increasing our emissions by doing that, but that's changing the emissions profile somewhere else. That's not accounted for in any of our pledges, right? And then second, I think we've realized that there's all these other metrics we have to pay attention to as well. So our overall resilience in the face of the impacts from 50 to 100 years ago of doing industrial development aren't changing tomorrow. So whatever it is, other things we're doing, we have to build into this system, this resilience.
But the one thing that is changing is that the industrial players care about what their electrons look like. I spend a lot of time with traditional industrial customers, whether it's steel manufacturing or car manufacturing, pulp and paper, and they care now. 10 years ago, I could not have walked in to a national manufacturing conversation and said, how do we all feel about advanced nuclear? They would have been like, how do you spell advanced nuclear? They wouldn't have cared about what I was talking to them about. They didn't care. And they care now because their customers have pressure. Our customers have pressure. Our cloud customers have pressure for us to deliver them a clean product, right? And so there's this global pressure for the industrial economy to be clean. So you have this amazing sort of amalgamation of ambition and capital and demand, and that's never happened before. And so I think it is insurmountable, but the powerhouse here is that you've got these customers that are willing to pay premiums. You've got customers that are willing to make these investments, that are really willing to sort of take a risk on some new technologies. And if we can just sort of push them all together and collaborate a little more effectively, I think that's what's going to change the regulatory model. That's what's going to change the business model. Because ultimately, to be honest, the utility regulatory model in this country was built to stimulate economic development. And it can do it again, it just has to be built with a different value stream.
And if I could, challenge that a little bit, right? That we can meet everything with all the demand with renewables. We track all of the power plant development globally. I just looked at the US number. Most recently, we have 13 gigawatts of new gas plants under construction today. there's another 16 gigawatts in advanced development, basically permitting, siting all done. GE has record numbers of gas turbine orders that their stock prices, since they went independent, have doubled this year in 6 months. Siemens is digging out of their stock price lows as well. So we're, in a way, the power markets, as we designed it, kind of, they are responding to the need for more power, but we are at a time when we don't seem to have enough dispatchable, long-duration resources that are available today. We have our 6-hour batteries, but when a hurricane hits and we have a 5-day, solar low in the grid, what do we do, right? And then you turn on your gas turbines. And that's sort of how markets have responded, and we see the PJM auction, capacity prices 10 times what their previous ones. We're now probably customers are going to be paying some of these average plants $60,000 a day for capacity payment, right?
But on the flip side, okay, and I think that's the difference between us and some other places where the government's trying to plan it out, is you have this democratization because we have all this different kinds of equipment coming in that's available. So number one, if I don't like your solution, right, I can build my own little community and I can put in my own community solar grid or whatever it is I want to do, and batteries or whatever. So you have some communities sort of taking charge of their own fate, right? You have the possibility that in some locations, utilities are taking the exact opposite view. I mean, take Vermont. They did a pilot for virtual power plant, right? And now they went back to the regulator, and they're instead of investing in plants, centralized plants, they're going to have, there's one where you bring your own battery, and there's another program where they lease you a battery, and they're going to basically try to make that a statewide solution, right? So, it's really kind of an interesting, almost like a competing paradigm. And I think one of the interesting developments, let's see Carolyn weigh in, is this idea that we're going to have consortiums of buyers. And the consortium, because as she's saying, if the consortium comes to a utility and says, hey, you invested in this natural gas plant, but that's not what we want this other kind of facility, the question is, in my mind, are they wrong because we have to have the natural gas facility, or we need to keep a coal plant on or whatever, or are we going to wind up with a lot of stranded assets because we're going in an inefficient way?
Yeah. So I do think the consortium model is where we will move. And actually, you saw that before. I mean, the first foray for commercial and industrial buyers into clean energy was largely through the utility solar program, right? That's what spurred a lot of this. What we have done recently with the clean transition tariff which took about 2 years actually to create, was to create this model tariff where any customer, we're looking largely at large load customers, could work with their utility to identify a clean capacity solution that could be brought online within their time frame of need, but that was outside the traditional regulatory paradigm of least cost dispatch. That's why they're building gas, because it's the least cost dispatch. That's what they're regulated to do, right? And so when you have a technology that can provide all the same attributes, but is not least cost, it's not going to get picked up in the system unless there's a policy or there's an additional buyer. So the industrial customer, any customer, can come in and say, we're going to pay that marginal difference in that capacity. You're going to bring that on and accelerate it into your resource plan. And then that's going to, increase your ability to pick that resource moving forward, because we've now taken it from development to commercialization within your resource plan. We did it once, and now we're looking at doing it with other customers in North Carolina and in Virginia and across the country. And when you start bringing in 3 or 4 or 5 industrial customers, that SMR or long duration storage or geothermal, it starts to get really cost competitive. And when you start saying, hey, we can bring this in and we can build it quicker than we can do natural gas because they're largely there, that becomes really, really attractive. So it's like shifting the incentive structure onto time and capacity as opposed to energy and recs, right?
And so this is the clean transition tariff,
Yes.
which you used for the first time in Nevada to
Yes,
to
Nevada,
purchase.
we brought on
geothermal.
115 megawatts of advanced geothermal with Fervo Energy. And the interesting thing about the structure is we didn't sign the PPA with Fervo. Fervo signed the PPA with NV Energy. And so then it comes back directly onto our energy service agreement, onto our tariff. We stay a bundled customer. We don't invest in clean energy outside the utilities books, outside their resource planning. And that's the other thing here is it's amazing that we have this $70 billion of investments in clean energy. You cannot underscore the good that that's done globally. But it also means that the utility has to go invest in resources to serve us reliably. They're not taking into account the solar and the wind we've developed. That's not theirs. It's not on their resource plan. And so part of this is pulling us back together, pulling the buyer community, the industrial community that's spearheaded so much of this growth, and the utility back together in a way that we actually function as a single system, because for the foreseeable future, it is going to be our load and other industrial load that determines how that system grows.
And how fast do you think that model is going to spread then? You're saying there's several other states now where you're looking at doing something similar?
Yeah, I do think it's going to spread. I think that it's something that we all knew we needed, but you said it's hard to change the regulatory paradigm. I think what was really encouraging about this one is it was actually the Nevada Commission that was on board with this. And I think regulators are getting on board with this, and they're really excited about it because they don't want industrial customers going off building their own power plants. No one wants that. We don't want that, right? We want to do this in a way that is actually net beneficial. But you've got to create the right structures to do it. Yeah.
Kate, what do you think about it? Is this kind of tariff a step in the right direction when you talk about this kind of fundamental change that's needed in the power system as a whole? Does that kind of business model really work? Well, yeah, go on, Amy. What were you gonna say?
Also, I mean, let's talk about the retail user, right? The small retailer user in maybe an underserved community or someplace, because energy burden post-COVID is probably not, it's been worse than it's been, historically. So Kate, how do we merge these two sets of values?
I think that in general, I really agree with you about the consortium model. CCAs, the community choice aggregation in California, is interesting also because it's basically another model of people banding together to have more market power to make something happen, which I think we've been doing that forever. Like, this is a thing people do, and I think it's very cool to see those models applied in interesting new ways to deal with the reality of just what's needed is not what's being provided, right? And how do you make that happen? You use collective bargaining to make that happen. That's what the consortiums are. They are collective bargaining. And so I do think it's really, really interesting, and I love that you're playing with, like, frankly, Google and others have enormous market power. So you're playing with that. Walmart did that with its supply chain innovation. Apple's done some of that. It's just interesting to see that play out. So for sure, I find it really interesting.
I would just say on the local piece too, this is something, I'm from the South. You can't tell in my accent, but I don't know if I have one anymore. Yeah, no, okay. But I'm from the South, and where I live, there are many, many households where 50% of their take-home pay is going to their light bill in any given month, And so the other consortium that we need to focus on is really how we get industrial customers, commercial customers, economic developers in general to think through the investments into their community that does three things, really. It decreases energy burden. It frees up electrons on the system, and it decreases reliance on fossil fuel, right? Because I believe there actually are enough electrons on the system for a lot of this. It's just we don't know how to get to them because they are leaking out of people's homes. They're not being recognized on the transmission system. And it's not gigawatts and gigawatts and gigawatts of power, but it is the difference between whether or not you can wait on geothermal to come online or whether you have to build natural gas in the interim. And we're not really focusing on these. And like some of the stuff that we've been doing in the Southeast, which I think is really interesting, is we've started investing in the pre-weatherization of homes that don't qualify for federal money, they don't qualify for some of the utility programs because they just don't meet the bar, right? Their homes are leaky, right?
Hang on, sorry, just to be clear about that. You, as Google, are spending money to pre-weatherize people's
Yeah,
homes.
actually, we'll announce it. I guess this will show tomorrow, but $1.6 million in South Carolina alone, and we're challenging our other utilities, our other industrial partners to join us in that. But this is resulting in like real tangible difference. We have homes in our community that have signed up to this that are saving between $600 and $800 a year on their energy bills. That is massive for someone who is, at or below the poverty line. Yeah.
So I 100% agree about reducing bills, but the flip side of that coin, we have to increase people's wages.
Oh,
Part
yes,
of
yes,
why people are
yes.
paying so much
Yeah.
of their wages for electricity is that we are hit at historic levels of inequality in this country. People are making far less than they did in real terms, 30, 40 years ago, particularly in urban Black and brown communities, in rural communities, and in tribal communities. These are like significant issues. So I do want to say the fourth thing on my list for you, at the same time we're doing all of this, all the systems change, all the building, all the many, many projects, all deploying all the dollars on the ground, it has to be done in a way that's actually paying attention to rebuilding an economy that is more diversified and that isn't this theory that we've had for 40 years that if we just make everything cheap enough, then everybody will be fine economically, because we've seen that falls apart as soon as there's a shock to the system. Again, COVID is a shock to the system, climate is a shock to the system. It's not fundamentally equitable to do that. And frankly, we're losing customers because people aren't making enough money to live. So if you want to do the pure business case. So I think it's, one of the things we did when I was at Department of Energy was when the infrastructure dollars came in, which was a very big deal to us, it was $62 billion to DOE, and fundamentally changed the agency. Like, we were a research and science agency, suddenly we were a steel in the ground project developer. Changed the agency around and created the Office of Infrastructure, David Crane's job. And one of the things we did when we did that was to say, these are big projects going into places. They are going to do a lot of good on the system, but they're also potentially the economic anchors for these communities. We're moving from a system of, coal mining, coal plants, fossil fuel anchor community investments, frankly, to a system of a totally different kind of anchor community investments. And so we said, if we're going to do that, we need to ask these companies taking this federal dollars, how are you investing in the communities? Like, what is your community benefit plan? And that, as you probably know, is 20% of the application for many of those projects, like the hydrogen hubs, et cetera. And it's interesting. You can throw things at me if you want, because I helped create it.
Yeah, well, I would like to do exactly that. Sorry, Carolyn, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, I think this way of thinking, again, forces the leaders on this to think in space and time and in place. And that's the big transition that I'm seeing, is that when you care about whether the grid is there for you, you start caring about the grid in general and that entire community. You start looking to be innovative. You start recognizing things. It took us 2 years to really understand what was the big issue that was going on with low-income communities and their ability to, turn their lights on, and what was the role we could play. But in that time frame, which we were really seeking answers, we were seeking partnerships, we learned so much about just general utility planning, around program structures, around the capital that was out there. And I think that there's this aha moment, when everyone gets to, that I think we talked about this in sort of the rehearsal, which is that we have this signal that is global on carbon, and we don't have a signal around our community and where we show up locally. But if we start showing up locally and we start thinking locally, we start fixing some of these big grid problems. If we keep thinking globally, we're never going to get down to like, well, how do you get a seam investment to work? Or how do you build a big transmission line in this community? Or how do you free up 150 megawatts and not build that one fossil fuel plant?
And just to be clear about this then, so this money you're spending on pre-weatherization, this is not philanthropic, or not purely philanthropic. I mean, you're aiming to get a return, are you, in the sense of, and if so, how does it work out in kind of dollars per megawatt,
Yeah, well,
what's
right
the
now we're doing
calculation?
it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's it. And we're challenging others to do it because it's the right thing to do. but I can see a future where, and we are working with the utilities in South Carolina to do this, but I can see a future where there is a utility program that allows industrial, manufacturing, commercial customers to invest in improving the community's energy burden, to make their houses less leaky, to put community solar on schools, to create resiliency sheds. And that frees up capacity on the system. That also decreases carbon, because the cleanest electron that you use is the one you don't use, right? And so I could see this really, if you think about it from a circular economy perspective, think about that in terms of the way you incentivize our dollars on the system.
That's fascinating, yeah.
Can I bring it back a little bit to the industrial policy side, right? That's, I think it's very important to have that kind of balanced conversation. So I live in Washington, D.C. I installed a rooftop solar project. The quote I got this year was lower than the quote I got 3 years ago. And I joke with my neighbors, it's the only thing that's gotten cheaper in America, right? I mean, solar panels, and you know it did not come from labor, because that's gone up. The only thing that's gone cheaper are the panels themselves. And I looked up the panels, they're coming from Malaysia. And then I looked at our research. To make the same solar panels in America, it's twice as costly. So this brings back this point about affordability and also industrial policy. We want kind of both. Mm-hmm. And I looked at my neighbors in Washington, D.C. In my row of houses, I'm the only one with a rooftop solar project. The project pays off in 4 years between the REC payments and the electricity tariffs. It's the best investment you would have in rooftop solar in the country is in Washington, D.C. People just don't do it. Whether or not it's rich people or it's poor people, I just don't see it. And part of that is people still see the upfront investment as way too high, prohibitive, right? And if we start saying, oh, you have to buy panels that are made in America today, that cost is going to be doubling what I'm seeing today. So there's a little bit of balance between longer term, we want to have an industrial supply chain, but in the near term, we have this sort of demand surge that we have to deal with, and affordability issue. So that's one thing that I think a lot of folks in the developer community that have been talking about in Washington, and sort of how do you balance that kind of between industrial policy and affordability, and maybe it's a question that both of you can help answer too.
I mean, I think the balance for me, and I can only just speak from Google's perspective, is that we have to invest in a way that's going to create optionality moving forward. Like, that's the way we look at everything, right? We don't like to do a pilot just to do a pilot. We want to do a pilot because we are needed in that space from development to commercialization. And if you think about solar's been commercialized, right? And so, we will continue to invest in solar, and we need much more renewables on the system. But if we just are sort of focusing on keeping what's already commercial cheap and not investing in the supply chain and the workforce of the other advanced technologies that are ultimately going to make or break whether we decarbonize the system, we're going to end up in the same place. So I would challenge him to say, maybe we're not going to fix all of it for wind and solar, but we know now what happens when we don't invest in that in the forefront. And so for these other technologies that we need, whether it's advanced nuclear, long-duration storage, geothermal, or just the grid-enhancing technologies that we need, well, let's start investing in that workforce and that supply chain now so we don't get into the same space.
I mean, I think that's right. It's a nuanced answer, right? Like, just because it's important to build some of the supply chain in the U.S. doesn't mean every single aspect of the supply chain makes sense at this moment to do in the U.S., right? I mean, every individual technology has a different set of location competitiveness characteristics. And so I think it's that one of the things that countries that do industrial policy, which isn't just China, it's Japan and Europe and a lot of countries. It's mostly everyone but us. But one of the things they do is they look across the ecosystem and they say, sort of, where are we? What is our asset map? What do we have? What's our infrastructure? What's our workforce look like? What are our natural resources? Where are we competitive in the supply chain as it currently stands? And you're starting to see that now. There's a really good paper out just recently from Carnegie Endowment, Milo McBride, I think, on looking across a bunch of critical technologies in the supply chain and saying, where does it make sense, to your point, for us to be investing now to build this up here because of location advantages, because some things need to be done close to markets. Some things are too expensive to transport. Some things are regulated differently. So how do we think about it in a little bit more of a nuanced way? Big chunks of the solar supply chain, frankly, we lost, in large part because we had a offshore policy for a really long time. And I think the question is, can we bring some of those things back? Not just because, again, I think there's a very strong case for just energy security and the resilience of our supply chains, but also because any economist will tell you that you have to have a diversified economy. It's got to have some production and manufacturing.
But this is what I would say also to the point, and we were talking about this on another panel I was on this morning, right? Which is that there are going to be some leapfrog technologies. So just to give you a story, there's all this discussion about the supply chain for batteries, and the processing is centralized, and it's a problem. We're starting battery plants in the United States, and people are questioning that. But in the end, there's a technology that Ed and I keep talking about. Ed's a skeptic, and I'm solid state batteries. That's going to be really game changing. And so Ed and I were actually arguing about it on a past show. Listeners, you'll remember. Right? And then I came on a different show and I said to Ed, look, the Chinese are so concerned about the progress that Japan and Korea and the United States are making on solid state batteries, and it would be so game changing that they have ordered that these, 6 or 7 battery companies, including BYD, that are leading in China, are not allowed to work on this technology alone anymore. They have to pool their resources and work on this technology, because in this tech sector, and that's part of with AI now, it's part of the problem here, is something could become obsolete. You blink, and all of a sudden you realize that the technology is moving in a different direction. It's hard to envision industrial policy in a sense that it's hard to imagine. And so I like kind of where we're going with this. I'm going to say this as an educator. Trying to anticipate what skills do I need the workforce to have in the United States, whether I'm going to retool people whose jobs are being eliminated, or I'm going to start with new people who are in grade school today. Like, we have to anticipate, first principles approach to education too, right? What is it that is going to be possibly a leapfrog technology? What are the fit-to-purpose things we should be designing to fix some of these problems? And then kind of like go to that fundamentally, because in the end, that's really where it is. It's not necessarily about, we have a lot of technologies that we already have and we can deploy them, but you're going to have these new opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I have many points I would like to raise in response, but I'm looking at the clock and I see that time is ticking on, and I want to give people a chance in the audience to ask some questions. I can see my colleague Ben over there in the corner is volunteering.
Thank you. My question is about the role that transmission, that regional or interregional transmission could have on these topics. So as Xizhou pointed out, in the near term, we're going to be dependent on gas and for dispatchable capacity. But now play forward 10 years and imagine that FERC Rule 1920 has come to pass and has survived challenge. And we have much more transmission on the system. We have more renewable imports to supply data centers that may be in other regions. How is that going to affect the gas build out that happens now? Is that a factor that power plant operators and developers should be factoring in now? Is that a significant risk to those types of facilities?
Thanks very much. Kate, you started talking about transmission first, but go on, Caroline.
I'm happy to come in.
yeah.
Transmission. You know, I like to say the IRA gave everyone a car, but we didn't have a road to drive them on. And that's how I sort of feel about the clean energy transition in this country right now. The most interesting thing to me on transmission is that we are perpetually building loops in this country, right? Each state right now is going ahead and building loops of transmission because that's as far as they can go. You know, and we have large swaths of the Western United States that cannot attract and grow businesses because there's not transmission there to service them. So if we are able to get transmission across this country, if we're able to move electrons, I think it's going to be a game changer, not only in economic development for this country, but I think it's going to be a game changer in when you start to think about what is the solution here. Because I've been in multiple meetings where I've had to say, well, the solution is actually building another line from the north of MISO to the south of MISO, but we can't do that. So instead, we're going to have to build supply in the south of MISO, which is not actually what we should be doing, right? So then you start thinking about infrastructure as a supply side resource. And then you have to start treating it like a supply side resource. And then the business models around it get much more interesting, and I think they become incentivized. Right now, I just don't think that there's as much investment in transmission because it's a 15-year game, right? You go to get a permit, and it's like, yeah, you can build that maybe in 15 to 20 years. No capital is going to be invested in that. There's no returns. If we can unlock the speed of building out transmission, then you can start treating it as a much different asset. And I think that what you'll end up seeing is transmission being part of a overall technology supply stack. So you have a large load customer going in, and they're investing in the overall solution, and the market's able to supply it for them, and that's going to be a big game changer.
Yeah, I mean, I think 100% transmission. I mean, I think it was Jesse Jenkins at Princeton who said sort of 80% of the benefits of the IRA will not be realized if we don't massively build out transmission. So completely agree. A couple things on that. One, this kind of goes part and parcel with, I think, kind of what I've been saying, which is we've spent a bunch of time measuring things only in terms of emissions and like local toxics, and we've spent a bunch of time building a knowledge economy and offshoring stuff. The great news about offshoring stuff is it makes your emissions go down. So, you know, look at the California charts of our emissions going down at the same time we offshored everything. It makes your emissions go down, but it also creates this false sense that the clean energy economy is this magic place where there's rolling hills and one wind turbine and no industry. And I think one of the real things we have to come to grips with as a country is that clean energy economy is still an industrial economy where we have to build a bunch of stuff. Building a bunch of stuff requires permitting streamlining. It requires real conversations with communities around why there's benefits in that for the communities. It requires just a different kind of conversation that we've been having because we haven't been building stuff, frankly, or improving the stuff we have for a long time. So I think that's one. Two, there's some super interesting innovations in transmission. Like I'm very interested in things like reconductoring, right? Where
Absolutely.
Where you're like taking existing corridors, you're making them
Yes.
more efficient. You're taking existing coal plants, you're using the interconnection that's already there. You're building on industrial land that we already have. Super interesting, tons of policy in favor of doing those things right now. Let's think in an innovative way, right? I think part of the way that we've sort of built stuff in America has tended to be build out and out and out and out on empty land, and we actually can be thinking in an innovative way about our existing stuff.
And let me like double down on that, back to the regulatory model. You know, we're looking at this and we're going to our utilities and we're saying, okay, well, what if we invested in the dynamic line rating? What if we invested in the reconductoring? How much would that, you know, open up? And they're like, oh yeah, that would open up hundreds and hundreds of megawatts. Yeah. I'm like, so why aren't we investing in this, right? And it's because there isn't a business model there to incentivize that investment, right? And so I think this is where this like crisis of capacity allows us to be really innovative, because you're not creative when everything works. You're not creative when it's an easy buyer's market. It's not a buyer's market anymore, and now you have to be creative.
Well, and my third really quick thing on that too is that AI is, yes, the problem in that it's a bunch of demand, but it's also kind of interesting when it comes to making transmission easier. So one of the things I learned when I was at DOE, you all know that interconnection queues are just unbelievably long, right? You want to build a solar plant and you cannot get it connected because the queue is so long. it turns out that part of the reason for that is that we haven't trained power system engineers for a really long time, because we had this idea of our economy that all engineers should be computer engineers, and so everyone got pushed in that direction. We have a huge shortage of engineers right now in nuclear and power system. So there's like 2 people at each of these utilities whose job it is to do the entire interconnection queue, and that's partly why it takes so long. But what if you used AI to do the interconnection queue? What if you looked at these queues and you looked at similar characteristics, locational variables, you grouped things together, you did cluster approaches? That's a very cool approach to using AI to actually fix the problem that AI is creating, which I think is cool.
Thank you.
Reminds me of that great line in The Simpsons about alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems.
Sure. No.
AI
no,
is the same,
no,
right? It's
no. Not
AI,
exactly
the cause
same.
of and the solution to all the problems of the grid.
No, but I do think it's interesting that we immediately jump to what is negative instead of recognizing there's this holistic thing going on here, right? So absolutely, we can use AI. We've used, Google's partnered across the globe in deploying AI solutions to improve, forecasting of wind patterns, to improve dispatch of, wind turbines, to improve drilling patterns for geothermal. So it's absolutely going to be the solution. And what I want to make sure happens is that we think through this in a way where not only is AI catalytic in driving the clean energy transition, but so is our load. Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, we're going to get to the point, I was just arguing with somebody about this the other day. We are going to get to the point where CAISO or PG&E or whoever it is that's, doing the centralized processing is not going to send you a text message telling you what to set your thermostat at. You're going to sign an agreement, like all these, different things we have on our smartphones that we push a button because we want that service, right? And your utility is going to secretly reach into your house when you're at work or you're on vacation or wherever, because you've agreed to it, and they're going to turn everything off for you and turn it all back on at a time when they're balancing the grid and they're going to use demand management. And it's going to be automated. You're not going to be thinking about it. It's just going to be done. Right? And also, the other thing we're doing with AI is that you can look at thousands of materials. In the old days, you had to have a guy in a lab and a woman in a lab, and then 50 graduate students, and you're all sitting there trying out like 1,000 different substances to figure out if you can come up with a better substance. Now you can have AI look at all these combination of substances and tell you which ones have the most potential. And then you're only trying to work with the ones that have the most potential. So believe me, there are groups of people looking at material science, trying to come up with something better than copper, that is not gonna, sag when it's hot, is not going to lose, what percentage of, who's an electricity person? What percentage of electricity is lost?
30%.
30%.
30% is
Okay.
lost on wires.
Okay, so if we had a wire that lost 0, I mean, huge difference. And the ability to decarbonize in that world is instantaneous, because now I don't need to build new generation, right? Because I can just move what I have with the generation I have, and then I can use the time zone, because peak is at a different time in a different place.
So we talked about wires and transmission. Can I bring up another negativity? Because I'm kind of the Debbie Downer today a little bit. In terms of things that are hitting us, we talked about building out more transmission and interconnection. The past year or so, we have a business in Woodmac that we work with half of the country's utilities to look at what they buy, how much it takes for them to buy it, how long it takes them to get all the stuff. Switchgear, this is the most mundane part of the electrical system. Switchgear demand is up 68% the past 3 years in the United States. Imports of switchgear has increased 238%. The wait times to get us some switchgear circuit breaker is more than 2 years average. We just saw one major utility telling us they went out and said, we want some power transformers. The lowest wait time they got from one of the suppliers, 5 years, the highest 7 years. So talking about a bus that's going to hit us, here's a bus that's also in front of us.
It's already hitting.
It's already hitting us.
hitting across the country. Yeah.
So we're in the middle of, we're launching a new multi-client study on this subject to really look at what's the supply and demand, and also NERC standards on what equipment we can use, and also internationally, are there places to source things that can actually meet this short-term demand? And this is, again, it's not rocket science. This is the equipment we've had for decades and decades, right? And we're now hitting a point where people just can't get a hold of them.
So when you talk about industrial policy and taking a holistic view of the electricity system, this is a huge issue, right? I mean, is there...
Oh, yeah. I mean, it is, I can work to create, and we can all work to create really innovative supply solutions. But if there isn't a transformer at our data center, I can't get those innovative supply solutions, to power us. I think that's part, though, in that we just were not planning for this. We weren't planning for this in a way that integrated our transmission and distribution planning with our generation planning. We weren't ready for this, and we weren't seeking this out. That's the truth, is that we as a country were not sitting down and thinking through how do we plan and incentivize investment in the backbone of what's going to spur economic development, and then go pass a bunch of bills that are going to invest in economic development. So we're doing it sort of backwards right now.
I think that's true, but it is not out of the question for the U.S. to be able to rise to these
I think we
occasions,
can
right?
do
That
it,
we are not
Yeah.
anticipating. We've done it
Right.
many times in the past. We do it, when there's war. We do it when when COVID happened. We employed the War Production Act when COVID hit to get manufacturing firms to actually shift over to making PPE because we didn't have enough of it.
Should we be doing that for transformers?
I mean, I think we should be looking at
And
transformers.
the
Yeah.
Congress has tried several times with a bill on
Yeah.
transformers, on transformer production.
I mean, I think we should be looking at this issue of transmission as a national security issue. I mean, it is a significant issue for us to reach all of these different goals that we have along all these different verticals. And again, it's not like we haven't done industrial policy in the past. The Defense Department does industrial policy every single day, right? Because it's responding to a set of threats that are constantly being projected and constantly being planned for. We just need to be thinking a little more holistically, I think. And that doesn't mean take over the economy from Washington, but it does mean deploy some of the time-tested tools, deploy procurement tools, deploy incentives, deploy some of our our ability to actually work with allies in a consortium to make things happen and move things more quickly. We do it all the time.
And at the state level, right? I mean, we keep talking about this at the federal level, but economic development is run by governors at the state level in this country.
Not in California.
Okay, not in
unfortunately.
California. Sorry, California is different. Everybody else. I don't have a data center in
We
California.
don't have an economic
Okay.
development agency in California.
I
Fun
think
fact.
this is another sector. I think some kind of balance of industrial policy is also needed, right? Because utilities are telling us we don't know if we should use the switchgear or transformer produced by large Western manufacturer factory in Turkey or in Mexico, because we don't want to install it, and 2 years later, the federal government tells us this stuff is made in another country and doesn't meet cybersecurity law standards. You got to replace all this stuff, right? This is what happened to some.
But to be
5G.
fair, national security realities change all the time, right? I mean, we think about this, we're constantly thinking about this with cybersecurity. People are constantly evaluating cyber terrorism risk. It's changing constantly. There's all of these risks of political uprisings. The oil and gas industry has been thinking about this stuff forever. So this isn't new to be constantly projecting and adjusting. So I definitely hear you, but I also think this is sort of a standard practice when it comes to other types of threats.
And this is why, partly why we wanted to convene a group of people to talk about this together, right? In terms of the various, like the government stakeholders versus industry versus, manufacturers that have global footprint. And then,
But that's also, I keep saying make it small, make it small. It's like, if the governors of the states in this country aren't sitting actively with their utilities, with their economic development departments, with their largest industrial customers, and co-planning the future, we're never
they
going
are.
to get there.
I mean,
I-
in many states, I
in
think they
many
are.
states, in many states, I think the conversation is starting. But I think the reality is that it goes back to this consortium idea. You know, this load is going to continue to grow, whether it be from AI and data centers or it be from other industrial customers and electrification of the industrial fleet. And we're going to miss out on opportunities because it is going to continue to grow, and it is either going to grow in the United States or it's not. And that's not something that's going to change. And that is a variable that is not going to change. To your point, it will go somewhere else. And I really think that that would be the greatest missed opportunity of this country to not only harness that economic development, but leash that economic development to get everything we want out of the grid in the transition in the interim. Because I don't think other countries have the same ambitions around that.
So I can see we're very nearly out of time. I can also see a few hands going up for a few questions at the front here. Thanks. Yeah.
So great panel, great discussion, divergent views coming together, coalescing. My question is twofold. One, it sounds to me, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, that really the things that you're trying to engage in fall under what's called adoption of innovation. In other words, there are early adopters and innovators. There are early majority, late majority laggards on the adoption curve. The question is, in the overall scheme of things, where are we on that curve, and are we, some of us, falling into the chasm between early majority and early adopters? That's one. And then the second component of that is, if you do what I think one of you mentioned was I think you mentioned circular economy, and you apply a circular economy approach to that, you can build a bridge across that chasm. It's already happening. And to give an example of the there's nuclear waste. People can now take nuclear waste and make it circular. So that's my question.
I'm going to try to answer your question in the way that we look at it, in the way that Google looks at it. So when we set the 24/7 goal, we decided we really wanted to be in that space, and I said this before, in between development and commercialization, right? There is a lot of concessionary capital out there right now to figure out development. And actually, the DOE, I think, is doing a really good job of vetting technologies so that then the private sector can take over and take it from development to commercialization. I do think that there are some technologies that are underutilized right now because they fit into this place where they don't need billions of dollars of concessionary capital, but they still need to get to a commercialization space, right? And we've been looking at this. A lot of this actually falls into what we've been talking about, transmission. A lot of these grid-enhancing technology companies, they're in this interesting space where what they actually just need is enough pilot proof points of deployment that can show the return on that investment, right? That's different than, is there enough capital out there to get them on the system? There's more than enough capital, right? So what I worry about actually is that in this rush to developing new clean supply, we're going to miss some of these micro solutions. I think about flexibility. I think about an aggregator company out there that is trying to deploy software to aggregate commercial flexibility and sell it as a product to me, who wants to buy it, right? Because I want to put more clean capacity on the system. I'm afraid those types of companies are going to get missed because I think the headlines go to big gigawatts and big, gigawatts of renewable investments, and that's what gets the big, shiny lights. But it's in these sort of more micro solutions that I'm not sure they're getting the play that they need to get. And I think that's a really interesting role for Google to play. I think that's the role the utility should absolutely play because it's their system. And I think we need to put a little more emphasis on those as opposed to sort of the big ticket items. Like, yeah, it's going to take billions of dollars to advance nuclear in this country. We absolutely have to do it, but we also need to play in these smaller places.
So I just make one point on that. So say I'm a utility leader, and everybody's absolutely told me that without question, reliability is, I'm going to be hung if I'm not providing reliability. And now you're coming to me and saying, and some of these technologies are amazing, right? I mean, we've had on guests that are from some of these companies. You're telling me you want me to use some experimental technology on my wires, right, to ease congestion or to figure out when I need to make a repair or to tell me when my wire might actually hit the ground and make a fire, right? There are all these different technologies that are coming. And if I use one of them and it either doesn't work or it makes my system unreliable, what happens to me personally? And I think that, part of where we need to go with this is think about how are we going to deploy these smaller technologies. We have the LPO office, the loan office doing these big things, but, are they rounding these smaller solutions so that it's not all on one human being in a utility taking a chance on it?
You're
So-
overestimating
Sorry.
utilities. Underestimating conservative. They don't even want to take a transformer from Turkey
Right, yeah.
because it's never been used in the U.S.
Correct.
Right? That's the sort of conservative approach.
Yeah. So it's been a fantastic discussion. We could absolutely go on talking all evening, but unfortunately we can't do that. Kate has got a plane to catch, and I know we do have to end it right now. We can certainly carry on the conversation over a glass of wine in a moment, but for now we're going to have to leave it there. But it's been great talking to you, Caroline. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thanks very much for hosting us in this fantastic spot at NYU.
Always a pleasure to have Energy Gang at NYU.
And thank you very much, Xizhou, for joining us. I'll see you back in the office.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you to our producers. Thank you to our producers, Toby Biggins-Gilchrist and Dan Cottrell. And above all, many thanks to all of you who are joining us here and who are listening out there in cyberspace as well. We'll be back very soon with more news and we'll be back very soon with more news and views from Climate Week, all the excitement that's going on here. But for now, until then, goodbye.